So the last part of this is kind of where do we go from here as a police organization? And we have some ideas, some proposals. At the end of the day, really, we want to hear what the council thinks. If you want us to move in a different direction, if you're looking at other reforms, ideas, an example of that might be, with the personnel complaints, as I said, we farm out to an independent investigator. We can send them all out to an independent investigator. That would free up more of our supervisors' time. Obviously, that would have some costs associated with it, but that, again, if we're talking about enhancing community confidence, these are some of the options I think that can be considered. We could send every single one of our complaint investigations to a neutral professional investigative firm, or we can use an independent monitor to come in and audit our investigations, like Santa Rosa does and the Sheriff's Department does. Some agencies do that. As you can see, the numbers aren't very high, so there wouldn't necessarily be a lot for that person to come in and look at. But when we do have one, that person can come in, look at our investigation, see if they agree with it before any findings are made. If they don't agree with the proposed disposition, they can recommend a different one and collaborate with us on the outcome involved. Those are the kind of options that can be considered. But we have some I have some very specific proposals for the City Council tonight. The most, I think, sort of outside the box proposal, and it's very new. This was, if there is a version of a cocktail napkin type of proposal, this was something that I conceived of and started floating and bouncing off of colleagues and our management team here at the police department last week to get some input about. And if you could please bring up the next slide, please. So this is a proposal for significant police department reorganization. And where this came from is, like everyone, I've been watching the dialogue and seen the signs at our protests. The first one in particular that I had attended and was there with our staff the entire time. There were some signs up that said defund the police. I've seen that as a part of the dialogue. And I kind of started looking into that to sort of peel back exactly what that means. And what I found is that that's the term that's used, but really it's a movement to take financial resources that go to the police department and put them into other areas that may be perceived as better uses for that money, frankly. So we in looking at the police department, and I think trying to come up with a proposal that I believe is the best fit for the city of Healdsburg. Ultimately, you will make that decision. And what I'm looking for is just some sort of consensus from the council tonight after this presentation of whether you want me to bring this proposal back for ratification or if you're wanting to move in a different direction. But here's what I would propose. It's sort of several components. I'll start by mentioning that the authorized sworn officer strength for the Healdsburg Police Department is 18 sworn police officers. That includes myself and our lieutenant and our administrative sergeant, our collectively our management team, and then our sworn police officers. As you know, we have 2 vacant police officer positions that we're moving forward to fill. Authorized strength is 18. What I'm looking to do is essentially conduct what I think would be a fairly outside the box experiment with our police department, a 2-year pilot program. We're about to start a 2-year budget cycle. I'd like to coincide with that so that the program so we can have some certainty about where we're going to be for these 2 years with the funding of it, and then be able to come back to the city council with a comprehensive evaluation at the end of that 2 years, but to come back to the city council more often with reports on how the program is going. So essentially, and I'll need some time to explain this here, there's 2 main components. One is to employ community equity as a core value in the police department. Because if you look at some police procedures, they're very neutral. And one of the things I've been hearing from communities that feel marginalized is, yeah, well, even if the policies themselves are neutral and even if the practices themselves are neutral, the impact of them isn't neutral, how that works out. So what we're trying to do is come up with a model, and there is no model for this. I've looked for this. We would be the model. Some cities are experimenting with novel approaches, San Francisco recently, but we've looked and I don't find a model that would be like this. We would kind of be the model. But essentially to try and weave community equity as a core value within all of our procedures, because you have policy here, you have notions of equity, and where the two meet, sometimes there's a result that you could say isn't equitable. And I have some examples where I'll talk about that. But equity is a very subjective concept. So we've already reached out to Sonoma State University, to the department chair at their pretty progressive criminology department. And we've got some tentative interest on their part to work with us to establish the actual standards and measures for what that would look like. I'm not a social scientist, right? I'm a police officer by trade. And so how can I work with them and our staff work with them to come up with the standards and measures to determine how we weave equity into some of these situations where when policy meets equity, you know, sometimes we follow our policy in a very neutral fashion, but it leads to an inequitable result. And so that brings me to, as you see, the next point is to redirect our funding toward a community equity team as a pilot program, a full-time dedicated team, which would consist of, and this is what I would propose for, again, number 17 and number 18 on our police department. Again, those are slated to be police officer positions, but are currently vacant. And I'm willing to experiment with those positions, which is, you know, it's not normal for a police chief typically to come in and say, I want you to cut me, you know, away these two positions and do something different with them. But that's exactly what I'm proposing. And if you look at our actual patrol strength, which is minus the 3 administrative, and we're talking about experimenting with our 15% of our patrol force. So it is something I think we have to be careful with. We live in a very safe community. It's some of the safest real estate in Sonoma County, and we want to keep it that way, obviously. So, you know, we're going to be mindful about how we weave this out. But the concept is that the 18th position would be a full-time licensed clinical social worker that would work out of the police department. And we would take that person and partner them with one of our police officers. And they would form what we would call our community equity team. And they would have a lot of responsibilities. First and foremost would be, okay, we've started this new program. We've got them. We want them both to be the, without a doubt, experts in, you know, notions of equity, fairness, unconscious bias. And we already train our officers in those areas. The state requires it. But I'm talking about training them even more than that, and not just making the training lip service, but having a constant dialogue within the organization through these two people that are dedicated to evaluating our policies and procedures, helping work with the academics to define how the equity is going to work with our policy and procedures, and to train in staff on these concepts and how that's going to influence what all of our police officers do, what I do, what our lieutenant does, how our parking enforcement does their work, every facet of what we do here at the police department. So that's how, as you see here, I envision them becoming the experts on equity and unconscious bias. And it's not just our in-house staff. At some point, you know, that's the initial emphasis. I would have them working with other city departments. It would be a citywide in-house training program as well. And then significant community outreach. They would be the lead on that. Lots of community meetings and facilitated talks where we can hear from, you know, it's hearing about stories of racism in Healdsburg. You know, we know, you know, that's going on, and that's not something, you know, we have our last survey, we had over 90% satisfaction rate from our community, and we want to keep that, you know. So having this dialogue and getting, you know, really specific about what the expectations are, in particular from marginalized portions of our community, that outreach part would be a significant component. And then, as you see, they're expanding that training to all city staff when fully implemented. So these two, this team would have a lot of work to do. The police officer would not dress like a police officer. I don't know necessarily what we do. Again, those details to be worked out. But, you know, one of the issues I hear about is, you know, the police department goes to so many things that some people think are odd, that we're sending a armed, uniformed police officer in a black and white police vehicle to deal with certain things. So here we're going to create a team that will specialize in equity and will be used as a tool to, you know, have some specific examples of the kind of problems that we would use them to solve. Because we're not talking about getting out of the problem-solving business as a police department. We're the only city department, besides the fire department, then you could pick up a phone and call 24 hours a day. So that's where I think the best place to house this is in the police department. I know some people may not be comfortable with that initially, but that's exactly what I'm proposing with these two positions. We have a non-traditional police officer working side by side with a licensed clinical social worker, and then maintaining the rest of our police staffing and getting them again. Also, now our staff already employs principles of equity. Okay, that we have an extraordinary and diverse staff here at the Healdsburg Police Department. I'm extremely proud of the work that they do. This is just a way of changing, I think, the basic fundamental mindset of how we go and do our job and what we respond to, and in some cases what we don't respond to, and what this team responds to instead. So you have the community outreach part, and then as you also see recommendations from these two, again, continuing to work with the academic piece on how we can even change some of our policies to incorporate principles of equity in ways that maybe have never been done before. Next slide, please. I think there's some things we should absolutely do. I want to talk about how this person would be selected, because I think that'd be something you'd want to know and the community would want to know. Be a community interview panel, and it would be a majority of non-city employees. Quite frankly, I envision a panel of 5 or 6 people and one person on that panel being a city employee. And of course, the HR department would have to proctor that to ensure that all laws and regulations regarding the hiring of a city employee are followed, and to guide and be an advisor to these community members who may never have sat on an entry-level oral before. But I envision this new employee being selected by the community. Other important components to this, I think this person should be compensated equal to a sworn police officer. What you see with non-sworn positions in police departments sometimes, there's just this automatic assumption they should be paid less than the police officer. I want them to be true partners in every sense, and including with compensation. I think this person should be compensated at the same level as the person next to them. The sworn police officer, to working with them, it will be a coveted position. We're going to emphasize its importance here at the police department. Normally a coveted position that involves specialized training receives a 5% increase in salary, like our detective, our traffic officer, canine officer, if we had one, they all get a bonus of 5% because it's specialized training and additional time commitment. And this is going to be a difficult job. I'm going to propose that the person receive a 7% bonus, which is a very, very high amount of incentive paid. We want to demonstrate that this is of value to the organization, it is of value to the city, and that is going to overnight make it the most coveted position amongst sworn employees at the Healdsburg Police Department. So again, bilingual, multicultural applicants would be specifically recruited and sought. I think that's extremely important. And at the end of the day, obviously this is a police department employee, but the hiring panel is, so I've got to make the decision, but I have a history in every hiring decision and promotion decision I've ever made. I'm going to look at what the original panel did, and at the most, I talk to the top 2 people and make a decision from there. But in this case, I'm going to want to go with whatever this community panel decides as far as the applicants they think is the best suited for the process. I think that's essential in this case. And the LCSW, again, just to give a rundown here, the initial mission and goals are going to be developed with the academic partnership, and there'll be this ongoing review. This is how I envision it, of our policies, practices, with a constant ability to make some recommendations. Measures of effectiveness, the academic piece will help us come up with a metric that will really allow us to define, ideally in 12 months where we have enough information and what we've been doing, so that we can report out to the council 12 months after this program's been implemented and kind of give you a sense of what it's been doing. There is no known existing model that we have found for a program like this. So the program has to be flexible. It has to be nimble. There's going to be nuances and changes. We really don't know how it's going to work. And honestly, I'm a little bit excited about this program. I think it's something different. I think it's something that progressive police chiefs have wanted to experiment with models like this in the past. And I think there's an opportunity here because of this national dialogue that we're having to do something like this. If I had brought a proposal or conceived of it a year ago or so, I can't really say that it would be taken seriously. It's really this momentum that we have that I think allows us as a city with a very progressive city council to move forward with something that would be unique and special, and I think is a good fit for our community. Next slide, please. And here's where I want to give some more specific examples about, and again, this is not all inclusive, but just to give you an idea of what I envision here. Issues surrounding homelessness. And homelessness, unsheltered population, it's a third rail in a lot of communities. And in the history of law enforcement, there hasn't been one police department that has solved a homeless issue in a large sense. We can make impacts and have small successes, but it's a problem that's way too complex. Yet the police department is the first resort for cities to look to in solving that problem. And I think that's a wrong model. I know a lot of police departments share my frustration about that. And because there's this expectation, you couldn't even go and interview. Well, I'm here to tell you, you wanted to go and interview for a police chief position right now. I guarantee you one of the questions that you're going to be asked is, what are you as new police chief of our city going to do to address and solve our homeless problem? There's just this expectation, this assumption, and that we're going to be the first people to deal with it and somehow make the big dent in it. So here, I've talked about that first bullet point, the effectiveness of our current model. I don't find it to be particularly effective. The best part of how we deal with it here in Healdsburg is our partnership with the nonprofit Reach for Home, which I think has been great. But that's just, that's moving in the right direction. But when we go out and deal with these issues, and again, we're the first person called with homeless issues that sometimes are aesthetic oriented and non-criminal versus non-criminal. And I think it's about time we evaluated that. Part of the dialogue is, should uniformed police officers be responding to certain calls at all? That's what you see as part of that dialogue. And I think that is a dialogue that we should be having here in the city of Healdsburg. So to me, the benefits of teaming a licensed clinical social worker with a police officer are pretty significant. This is a level of training that it takes to get that in the clinical hours and field work that somebody has to have to become an LCSW. That's no small matter. We're talking about bringing a specific experience level into here that's never been here. And talking about that, I know some might say, no, this can't come from the police department. This can't come. I've looked at like what San Francisco is doing and talking about, more funding for outside social worker resources. A lot of people say the police department, the solution can't come. I believe this solution has to come from the police department. I completely disagree with that. I think that if you want long-lasting change in the culture of law enforcement in America today, that has to come from within the police department versus something that is dictated and said, you have to do this. And, we're going to have a social worker, but they're not really going to come to your station and interact with your staff other than out in the field. This person is going to work side by side with a police officer. That police officer is going to gain their perspective. They're going to gain some of the police officer's perspective. I think that is an extremely valuable piece of what this program would do, the two together. Also having a police officer working directly with that social worker who will then come in and get to know all of our police officer staff. That social worker can go into a lot of situations with a police officer. Sending a social worker into an active suicidal subject or call where a homeless person might be acting out without that a police officer presence, I don't know that would be safe. So this really allows us to do a lot more with this team. The LCSW has the ability and the skill set and the knowledge of resources that nonprofit entities bring to the table that, again, our police officers aren't social workers. So why are we treating them and sending them on calls constantly that ask them to almost be like that? It's, it's a frustration that I think police managers and police officers have shared for time. Sometimes a uniformed, armed, traditionally trained police officer is just not the best resource to handle certain things. So community education is a huge part of this component. And the reason for that is if you look at our calls for service, we're getting calls from the community about homeless issues. So we've got to educate the community about, the notion of who is the best person to come and deal with that. And that may mean that the social worker and the police officer solution may take a little bit longer, right? So it may not solve the problem as quickly because it's going to be a more, it's going to be oriented toward long term, and Reach for Home. I don't want to minimize what they do for our community. They've had some extraordinary successes. I saw them take one of our most chronically homeless people who acted out and generated a lot of calls for service by themselves and get that person housed. And I was extremely impressed with that. So here we're not talking about replacing them or that they aren't doing a good job. We're just talking about giving them, buttressing what they do with a significant amount of additional support that I think could be really a model for other cities potentially. I think this is the future of things, in my opinion. Mental health issues, again, our officers have crisis intervention training. They're all well trained in that. They're all trained in de-escalation, but they don't have the expertise of a licensed clinical social worker. And so I do think our model as a whole is effective, but it's only to a certain limit. We go out and we sometimes place people on mental health holds, and then they go in and they come out. Where's, again, the long-term solution to that mental health issue from the police perspective, from as far as our role being dedicated toward that. Traditional police response, again, with the shelterless population and with mental health population, there's a time and a place where a traditional police officer may have to respond. If someone is committing a crime, it's a mental health issue, committing a crime, or someone who's shelterless committing a crime, the police are going to have to go. But it may, if they're on duty, be the first response of this. Again, we're not going to have them 24/7. But the benefit is that having this person as part of the organization, again, is reinforcing these principles of equity, constant dialogue, not just every couple of years how post state requires it, but a constant dialogue over equity, escalation, de-escalation, really increasing that level of dialogue and training far beyond what's required by the state of California, so that the traditional police response becomes a last resort versus the current model where it's the first resort. So, and the recent example I have is a parent who contacted one of our officers about her son's mental health, and she was concerned. And we did, again, the normal model. We made notes of it. We documented it. We notified all our officers, hey, here's this concern. We provided referral resources to the parents so that they could contact people who might have the expertise that we as police officers don't have in mental health, whether they're a nonprofit or at the County of Sonoma. Here we would be going significantly farther in having this team reach out to the parent, sit down with the parent, perhaps sit down with the son as well. That's up to the team and whatever the best practice is there. I don't know. And again, but it's a significant increase in the level of service that our city would be providing and taking it away from traditional policing, both in terms of what we do and, again, financially with these two positions that we're reallocating. And I just, if I sound very interested and if not excited in this program, it's because I am. I think this has the potential to really allow our police officers to focus their duties on areas that are more where they should be focused. And also ingrain in them when they are that, because if the team isn't available, they still might have to go, just reinforce the already great attitudes that our staff has and the already significant level of compassion that I see from our police officers all the time. This would complement our already existing youth diversion program in a really significant way as well. Now I have a couple more. I realize I've gone quite long. I just have a few more things. I wanted to give, for additional context beyond the shelterless homelessness issues and the mental health issues, a couple more, again, where policy and equity meet. And the first one I want to talk about is neighborhood parking issues. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Chief Burke, I just want to clarify. So we've been going at this for a little over an hour now. I just want to make sure council has the opportunity to ask questions. The community has the opportunity to ask questions. So maybe we can just go through these real briefly. I think you've hit the high notes with regards to what your proposal is, but if we can go through these briefly and allow council, the community to ask questions. Thank you.
Fair point. I will wrap this up very quickly. Neighborhood parking, the reason I put that in there is that's a classic example where, we go in, we mark a car because it hasn't been moved for 72 hours. Well, if my car gets marked or a council member car get marked and towed, I'm going to go down, pay the fee, and get it out. But for somebody who might be of a marginalized community or lower socioeconomic status, if their car gets impounded, they may never see that car again because they never afford to get it out. So that issue, how you deal with a car parked in a neighborhood, has potential for inequities. So the LCSW, that our team can go out and use the impound process as a last resort. Example, we had a recent complaint over a parked vehicle, and I think this is why the city council support for a position like this would be absolutely crucial, because I'm the chief of police, and I had no less than 4 specific inquiries to me about one parked vehicle that was in a community and we hesitated to tow it because it's COVID. We didn't know why the guy couldn't move it, but one window was missing and taped over, so it's an older vehicle. And so we were hesitant to move it because we didn't know if he was there sheltering in place or what it was. We always, even today, try and contact the owner. But in some cases, particularly with older vehicles, the ownership doesn't get transferred right away. It's not currently registered because they can't afford it. So we can't always contact the owner. So here's where we go out. We dig a little bit deeper. They're assigned. They do it. But again, a significant community education component, because that car might just have to sit here a little bit longer before it gets dealt with. A vending complaint, really quickly. Again, we had people, we get complaints about no business license for people vending fruit. We've had one repeatedly with a business. And to me, that has a potential for inequity, because that particular person who doesn't have a business license, that sale there is their livelihood. So here we'd be looking at a model that would, in some cases, maybe not even respond at all to that situation. And if we did respond, our team, rather than saying, you can't be here, you don't have a business license, is going to say, not only can you stay, but we're going to help you get a business license, and you can stay while that business license is in process. Because again, at the end of the day, it's a minor municipal code violation. And so we want to just rethink the way we do this in terms of equity. And city council support essential for the program. And I appreciate your time and attention. Just one last slide to take a second. Lastly, this was an idea, and the reason I want to bring it up. This was a proposal from one of our sergeants. You see his quote at the bottom. Like a lot of our staff, high anxiety at the level of concern over our equity and how we do what we do. And, we don't want that. We want our community to have absolute confidence in what we do. And this is his quote at the bottom. And what he's proposing is a citywide event honoring different cultures and diversity in the Healdsburg community, reaching out to all these marginalized, some marginalized groups, but all inclusive, and celebrating Healdsburg as a diverse community. So I'm really encouraged by that. He's going to take the lead on it. So again, that's really, sorry. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, more than I usually do, and I'll stop at that point because I know there's significant interest from the community and the council to comment on this.